Hello and welcome to this presentation on Microsoft products. The aim of the presentation is to give an overview of the core Microsoft products, including client and server products. My name is Vicky Lee and I will be taking you through this presentation today. This slide shows some of the products that we'll be going through today in this session, and we will be starting off with the desktop. So let's introduce Ewan the user. And as you can see from the picture here, Ewan is working on a desktop PC, but that could just as easily be a laptop. Now when Ewan comes in the morning and turns on his computer, he needs his computer to work. And for that computer to work, it needs to be running a base layer of technology. Now that base layer of technology is known as the client operating system. And the current client operating system is Windows 7, which comes in a number of different editions. But the two editions that are aimed at the business user are Windows 7 Professional and Windows 7 Enterprise. But as I said, there are a number of different editions available. So let's take a look at them and see who they are aimed at. As you'll see here that there are a number of editions, and on the left-hand side shows the editions that the home user would be working with a starter edition that would be put on a small sort of netbook type computer, going all the way up to the fully loaded Ultimate edition. And when you look at these different editions, you'll see that they are available through different channels. So you can buy all of the home user editions through the OEM channel, or you can purchase things like Ultimate and Home Premium through full package product. But really today we're concentrating on those business editions, so Windows 7 Enterprise and Professional. And Professional you will see is available through all three channels. In other words, you can buy it through volume licensing, as an OEM license and as a full package product. Whereas the Enterprise edition is a software assurance benefit, so the only way to access the Enterprise edition is to put software assurance onto your Windows 7 Professional license, and you'll then be allowed to install Enterprise. So we've talked about the fact that Ewan needs this client operating system to make his computer work when he actually turns it on. But that's not really good enough. Once he's at work, he'll need to be working on his Word documents, his Excel spreadsheets. So what else does he need running? Well, he needs client applications. And the client applications at the moment are Office 2010. Now again, this does come in a number of editions, and the two main editions that you'll see businesses using are Office Standard and Office Professional Plus. But as we did with Windows 7, let's take a look at the other editions of Office that are available. So as you'll see here, we do have a number of editions aimed at both the home user, the more professional sort of home user, and then the business user. And again, as with Windows 7, they are available through the different channels. But the editions that are sold through volume licensing are Office Standard and Office Professional Plus, and that's really what we're going to have a look at now. So Office Standard consists of 6 different products: Word, Excel, PowerPoint and Outlook, as Office Standard always has, and now this edition also contains OneNote and Publisher as well. Whereas, if we look at the Professional Plus edition, you see that it has the same 6 products that Office Standard has, with Access, our desktop relational database product, InfoPath, Link and SharePoint Workspace on top of that as well. Let's take a look at some of the products you might not be so familiar with, starting off with SharePoint Workspace. Now there are a number of products that are branded SharePoint, and this is just one of those products. When we're talking about SharePoint, what we're really talking about is collaboration. In other words, working together with colleagues. So it might be a case that you have files you all need to access that you would place on the SharePoint site and that you can all get at. Now SharePoint Server is great, but you do need to be online when you access those files. SharePoint Workspace enables you to take SharePoint files and work with them offline. So if you are working at home or in a hotel and you have no internet connection, you can still access those files that you need to work with. The next product to look at is InfoPath. And with InfoPath you need to think about XML forms. It's a product enabling you to create nice user-friendly forms for end users to fill in, and you will see from this sample picture that those forms can have date controls, list boxes, check boxes, all of those normal controls that you would like to have on a form. So you create your form, and when the end users fill in that form they hit the submit button. But because it's an XML form, the data isn't tied to one back-end system. So when they hit the submit button, that data can be populated into any back-end application that you need it to go into, making it a very versatile form product. The next product to think about is OneNote. OneNote's really a digital workbook, so if you are taking notes today watching this presentation, you might be taking them with pad and pen. If you were using OneNote, you could be taking those notes straight into OneNote and having them in a digital format. You will see here from the screenshot that OneNote can take bullet points, to-do lists, pictures, really any information that you would like to hold into OneNote, you can pop into it. The last product to look at in this section is Link. Link is our instant messaging solution, but it is all about being an enterprise instant messaging solution, so it is secure and auditable. You will see again from the screenshot that on the left side we have a snippet of an instant messaging conversation between Scott and April, but on the right hand side the other thing that Link does show us is presence information. Presence information is all about knowing who is online, offline, who's in a meeting, so really knowing the best way to communicate with someone. You know there's no point in phoning someone up if they're in a meeting and they're not going to be able to answer the phone, so Link is providing us with that information. Do be aware though that there does need to be a server at the back end for this to work, and I will come back to that later in this presentation. So, we've talked about Ewan and the desktop products that he might well be working with in the form of the Office suite. But does Ewan work on his own? Probably not. It's very likely that Ewan will have colleagues that he needs to work with, be they colleagues in the office or maybe working with people externally through the internet. And to do this, he needs to be working on a network. And when he's working on a network, he does need to have a server then that he would connect to enable him to work with his colleagues. That server also needs to be running an operating system for that server to work. So the server operating system is Windows Server 2008 R2. As I've said, Windows Server 2008 R2 is the current Microsoft Server operating system. And again, it does come in a number of different editions aimed at different sizes of business and different business requirements. But all of the Windows Server editions do include some technologies, and these technologies are very important to aid those business requirements. We're talking about things like rights management services, remote desktop services, and HyperV. So I'm just going to go through and take these different technologies and make sure that you are happy with them. And first of all, we're going to look at rights management services. Rights management services is all about restricting what happens to content. Most businesses will have content that is confidential, and what they don't want is for that confidential information to be leaked out of the organisation, be that a confidential email, Word document or spreadsheet. With rights management services, you can set permissions. So imagine that I had written a confidential email, I'd addressed it and I'd put all of the text in. I can then go through and set permissions onto that email of what is allowed to happen to that email, and would then send it to the appropriate person. When that person receives the email, they'll only be able to see the text when the system has verified that they are the correct recipient of the email. So if the email has been intercepted by someone, they're not going to be able to read that text. And then depending on what permissions I've actually set, the end user will then only be able to read that email. They might not be able to print it or copy and paste any text out of it or forward that email on to anybody else. Therefore restricting what can actually happen to that content and hopefully removing the possibility of confidential content being sent outside of the organisation. The next technology to look at is remote desktop services. If we look at the situation here, we have a couple of servers sitting in our organisation. And over on the left-hand side of the screen, we have some laptops used by staff that work in and out of the office. So they have their client software, Windows 7 and Office 2010, installed locally. Over on the right-hand side, we have the highly managed devices that reside within the organisation, the desktops and the thin clients. These devices are required by the organisation to run Office from the server. So what would we do? Well, we would use remote desktop services. Basically, we would install Office 2010 on the servers, and then the users that are using the desktops and thin clients would connect to those servers using remote desktop services. Really, they do this by clicking on the icon of the application that they want to run, but the application actually processes on the server. So if they were running Word, Word would be processing on the server, but the screen of Word would be presented back to the computer that they were working on. The last Windows Server service to look at is HyperV, and this is all about virtualization. In this example, we have one physical server. We know that this server requires an operating system, and therefore it has one of the three main editions of Windows Server running on it, as well as any other applications that may be required, such as Exchange. However, if we wanted to look at virtualization, we need to bring in the fact that Windows Server includes HyperV, which is our virtualization technology, meaning then that our physical server can support a number of virtual servers. So these virtual servers exist on our physical server, but they do all run their own operating system and then their own sets of applications. And this helps us to sort of reduce the number of physical servers that are required in the organisation. We've talked about the fact then that Ewan will be running his client operating system, his client applications on his desktop machine, and that he will be connecting to that server, which will also have its own operating system running on there. But that really isn't all that Ewan is going to do. He's going to want to do things such as sending emails. And if he wants to send an email using Outlook, he does need to have a server application running on that server as well to facilitate that. So that's our next section, taking a look at some of the server applications. And if we're thinking about email, the first server application we need to look at is Exchange. So Exchange Server 2010 is our email server. So as I say, it is there really to manage the whole email and calendaring aspect that we work with. It comes in two different editions, but one of the nice things with Exchange Server is it does provide users with choice on how they actually want to access their emails. Let's take a look at the choices a user does have. I've already mentioned the fact that we have Exchange Server in the background facilitating the whole email process. So the first choice would be to use Outlook, which is probably the most traditional way of getting at your emails, when you'd come in the morning, sit at your computer, launch Outlook, and happily work away with your emails. But what if you weren't at your own computer? Then you could use the Outlook web app, and this is browser-based access into your emails. So you'd sit at a computer, which needs to have an internet connection, go into the browser, surf to your Exchange server, log on, and you'd then be able to get at your emails. Outlook web app is very similar to Outlook, so it has the same look and feel of Outlook, enabling you to do pretty much the same things, including having your answer phone messages coming into your inbox, where you could listen to those and hear what people are saying to you. Alternatively, you could use Outlook mobile access, and this allows you to use your mobile phone to connect to your Exchange server and have your emails, diary appointments and so on come onto that device. And then finally, there's the Outlook voice access, where you can telephone the Exchange server, and again you can access your emails and calendar appointments from there too. So what are the other ways that Ewan might want to communicate? Well, we have already discussed Link, the instant messaging solution, where he could have an enterprise instant messaging conversation with colleagues and he could see presence information. Link was the client product and is part of the Office Professional Plus suite. But I did mention at the time that there would need to be a server running in the back end, and this server is Link Server. Link Server does a number of things. I have already mentioned a couple of them, instant messaging and presence integration, but it will also power your web conferencing and your voice integration as well. So just to clarify, the instant messaging is that text conversation you'll have with your colleagues, and presence integration is about being able to see who is online, offline, in a meeting, etc. The web conferencing aspect allows you to host a web conference. So, for example, you can run meetings or training with people who are based anywhere, and they would just connect through their browser or Link client to that meeting and be able to join the web conference. Link Server can also power your voice and telephony systems. So if you want your phone system powered by Link Server, it will do that, enabling you, for example, to make phone calls from within Link without having to go to a phone. So we've seen that Ewan will email people and he may well instant message people. But what else does he need to do? Well, he does need to access his files and access content that is held within the organisation. That content might be held on an intranet site, or it could literally just be shared sites where all the documents and the presentations, spreadsheets that Ewan needs to work with are held. So the product to enable him to do that is SharePoint Server. So SharePoint Server 2010 is a vast product. There's a whole variety of things it does, and really it's almost now a platform that you would need to set up and configure to work in the way that you want it to work for your organisation. So what SharePoint Server does is enable you to manage all of the content that is being held in an organisation, so manage who has access to what files, automate business processes that the organisation might be working with, and very importantly, making life easier for people to find information and share information. And the nice thing with the sharing information is it can be shared sort of wherever. So it might be shared internally through an intranet site. It might be shared to known people, such as partners, through an extranet site, or it might be sharing information just externally to the outside world via the internet. Now, SharePoint Server does come in sort of a couple of flavours. You have got the full-blown SharePoint Server product, but there is also a product called SharePoint Foundation that again gives an element of the SharePoint technologies. So this is a screenshot of SharePoint Foundation, and what you've really got to think about is the level of sharing. SharePoint Foundation is more sort of team sharing. So if you have individual people or people in a team that just need to work together and share information with each other, then they would use SharePoint Foundation to do that. And you can see from this screenshot there's a shared documents area where documents can be placed that your colleagues might want to work with. With SharePoint Server, you've got to think the scope is more sort of company-wide sharing. So you do want to share information across the whole organisation or out to the outside world, then SharePoint Server would be the way to do that. Now, one thing you do need to appreciate is with some of our server applications, there are some back-end infrastructure requirements. I mean, we've already talked about the fact really that these applications all need to run on an operating system. So if you are working with Exchange, Office Communications Server, SharePoint Server, they do all need to be running on a server that is running Windows Server. So we've already mentioned that aspect. The other thing to bear in mind is that some of our products do also require a back-end database to store all of the information. And that back-end database would be SQL Server. So the latest version of SQL Server is SQL Server 2008 R2, and it does have a number of roles. It is our server-based relational database. As I've already mentioned, it is required as a back-end storage infrastructure product for some of our other server applications, such as SharePoint Server, and it is at the heart of Microsoft's business intelligence solution. And when we're talking about business intelligence, what we're really talking about is taking raw data and turning it into useful, actionable information, which the company can then respond to and can push the company forward to meet their business goals. What you have to think about in an organisation is that the organisation will hold data in a whole host of back-end systems. So that data is really just the facts and figures that we're working with. Now, if you're working with SQL Server, the integration services part of SQL allows you to take the data from all of your back-end systems and put that into one huge data warehouse. The data warehouse really being a store of all of the data in one place. You can then use the analysis services to slice and dice that data and extract the pieces of information that you need. That information is fed into the reporting services, and the reporting services component allows you to create nice user-friendly reports that then get pushed out to the appropriate end user. So as an end user, you get a report telling you all the information that you need, facts and figures on how past sales have gone or whatever it might be. And SQL is there in the background pulling all of that information from the back-end systems and presenting it on to you. We've looked at a number of server applications: Exchange Server, Link Server, SharePoint Server and SQL Server. And as you can imagine, a company might be happy running with all of those server applications, or they might want to pick and choose the individual ones they'd like to run. Now, typically these applications are going to be installed on different servers. So the company would have more than one server running those different server applications. And what we've got to think about is that if you are running a number of different servers with different server applications on them, is how to ensure that they stay up and running. And that's really where Ivan, the IT manager, comes into play. These servers, they'll work beautifully, but they will need a little bit of maintenance. So Ivan comes in to make sure that everything is running properly, that Exchange isn't falling over, that SQL is nice and happy, providing all of the data that is required out to the SharePoint site. And as I say, really that does fall under the role of the IT manager. But Ivan can't do this on his own, so he does have a whole set of tools in place to help him with that management cycle. And these tools are the System Center tools. So we have at Microsoft a whole family of System Center tools. They're all branded System Center, and they are the management solution. So they're there to help Ivan, the IT manager, to monitor the servers, and they will report back on how the servers are running, and if a server's not happy, he can go in and he can fix that problem before it results in downtime. They'll help keep all the client machines up to date with all of the latest patches, that kind of thing. Backup solutions to ensure that all of the data is backed up, and solutions as well to facilitate the whole virtualization aspect. So there's a whole number of System Center tools out there to make Ivan, the IT manager's life a lot easier. So if you look at that statement at the bottom, it is this family of leading IT management solutions helping IT professionals to proactively plan, deploy, manage and optimize their physical and virtual IT environment. So do remember that the System Center tools work in the same way whether you're in a physical or in a virtual environment. It really doesn't matter. So they're there to help Ivan. But what does Ivan, the IT manager, also need to think about? The other key aspect he needs to think about is security. Now you can imagine that when you're working in a network environment, you are open to security breaches. This might be in the form of spam email. I mean, we all know what it's like with spam. It's just really annoying getting bombarded with this email that you don't need. So there's things such as spam that we don't want. There's viruses that we don't want, be they viruses running on the server or viruses running on our client machines. And also hackers trying to break into the network environment. These are all things that companies face on a regular basis, and they do need to ensure that they have defense against that. And that defense against things like spam, viruses, hackers all come in the form of putting in firewalls, putting in antivirus, anti-spam software, those type of solutions. And those are provided by our Forefront products. So we have a whole family of products that are branded Forefront, and this is a family of products there to provide the whole security solution. We have a firewall product, products to protect the main communications servers, so antivirus, anti-spam products to protect, for instance, Exchange and SharePoint Server, and products to protect the client machines. So we've looked at the fact that Ivan, the IT manager, has our System Center products to help with management, and he has our Forefront products to help with the security side of things. But what happens to the businesses that don't have an Ivan, the IT manager? What do they do? And really those type of businesses are typically going to be the smaller businesses where they maybe don't have a dedicated IT manager. They might have a person in the organisation that is there to look after the computers as well as doing his real day job. So the solution for that is to put in some software aimed at the smaller business. And this comes in the form of Small Business Server. Now, Small Business Server is basically a ready-made package for a company that wants to put in an email solution. It comes in a standard edition with an optional premium add-on. The standard edition consists of Windows Server, Exchange Server, SharePoint Foundation, and the Windows Server Update services. The optional premium add-on consists of another license for Windows Server and a SQL Server license, allowing you to run SQL on a second server. Now, what's so great about this is that by providing the second license for Windows Server and SQL Server, it is providing the back-end infrastructure for any line of business application that the company might be using that relies on SQL Server. The other key thing to point out here is the size of organisation that Small Business Server supports. It supports up to 75 simultaneous user or device connections. So it really is for companies of up to 75 in size. Maybe, more realistically, for companies of up to 50 users, with a bit of room for growth for any new employees they might take on. As we draw this presentation to a close, let's have a quick reminder of some of the products that we've looked at today. We've looked at the client operating system, Windows 7, the server operating system, i.e. Windows Server 2008. We've looked at some of the client applications and some of the server applications, and then we've touched upon the System Center products, which are our management products, and the Forefront family, which are our security products. So that concludes this presentation. I hope you've enjoyed listening to it and wish you the best of luck when taking the associated assessment.